Hello, and today we are going to look at the Python library Click, which is used to quickly develop command line interfaces for applications. Naturally, you will want to use Click or another library like it if you are starting up a new command line application. But some other use cases are to add admin commands to existing web software or to quickly prototype new functionality. To get started, the first thing we have to do is install the library. So to do that, we use pip, and it's just called Click. And I already have it installed locally, so I can get going. So the first code we can write is to import our library. And then what we're going to want to do is define a default code path if this is the main module being called. And then what we're going to do is define our function. And this will be the root node for our commands. And to define this as a root node, what we do is we call this click, and then we call group. Now, let's say we want to add two commands called add and subtract. What we can do is say at main, and then what we can do is call this command. And then what we can do is define a function called add. It takes two parameters, x and y. And all it does is it prints the sum. So we say we're going to take the x, we're going to print the y, and then we're going to print the sum. X, y, and then the sum of x plus y. And then we're going to save. And so to recap, what we define as a root node, and we're going to call this when this script is called by itself. And then we're adding a subcommand called add under it. So then if we go to call this function, so we call Python m main, it's going to say that we have a command called add, and we can call add. And we're going to notice that we have to define our arguments. So to do that, we do click dot argument. We want to call our first argument x, and we're going to call the second argument y. All right, and then when we do that, get rid of that comma, we got 56. Now there's a mistake here. So by default, the arguments are passed in as strings. And so the string x, so the string 5 plus the string 6 is 56, not 11. So to fix that, what we do is we say the type is going to be passed in as a float, or you can say int. So when we do this, and now when we add, we get 11. And let's say this is no longer a valid integer, it'll automatically now check that that is not a valid float. And to just quickly, reinforce this, let's say we want to have a function called subtract, or just y. And then we're just going to do the same thing. X, y, x minus y. And for the sake of argument, we're going to make these integers. All right, so now we save. Now we subtract. And this should show -1. Now, let's add one more command. And this is going to be reverse. So it takes some string. And what we're going to do is we're going to want to print this string in reverse. And to do that, I believe this is -1, and that will reverse the string. And we're going to register the command. And this is going to be a string argument. And by default, it's string, but we can also, if we want to declare it, we can define the type as string here. And now we want to reverse, well, you see it's reversed. So it might become apparent that as we have more commands, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. So we can add subgroups. So to do that, what we can do is say, okay, main.group. And now this will be a subgroup under main. And we're just going to say, okay, let's group the add and subtract under one group called math. And then reverse will be under strings. This will be pass. Now these two commands will be under math. And this command will be under string. So now we'll define the string. And these functions do not have to have any code in them. And we can just name this param because it's going to fuss at the name. So now, if we run this command again, it's going to fail because it only knows the commands string and math. And the next thing we have to do is fix this. And now we can see that this is working. So finally, in real production code, we won't want to have a lot of the business logic in the commands. So what we can do is define a controller. This can be anything. And this will be the business logic of our main functions. So we can say do add. And these must be floats. And this will be, for the sake of argument, let's pretend we're doing something complicated here. X, int, y, int. And finally, def do reverse. So add some space there. Some string, and this will return some string, and that will reverse the string. Now, what we can do is then import our controller, and then call, say, sum equals controller dot do add x y. I believe I probably shouldn't use sum because that's a built-in. So just call results here. Results equals controller dot do sub x y. These will be results. Finally, results equals controller do reverse, and we just pass in string param. So my experience in working with libraries like Flask, importing files directly from an application that's not by default CLI can cause some issues, particularly with like redundant or cyclic imports. The other thing is some imports can be slow when you won't want to import the entire application, just part of it. So a way we can do that is to define that in here and take this out of the top level. And this way we are only importing the code we need. So for instance, if there's code or libraries that by default import or set up a database connection, and we don't want to do that in the command line by default, then we'll just only do that for the commands that need it. Secondly, to help clean things up, another thing to do for good practice is to do a do register, is to register the commands in a higher level function. And this helps, with namespacing. So for instance, we want to register the math. What we can do is move this up here. So now everything is defined purely in this namespace, and stuff we don't need will not be outside the namespace. Oop, I just need to tab this over. And then to invoke the function, all we do is just call doRegister. Again, this seems silly to do in a small application, but in very large applications with a lot of variable name reuse, this can help a lot. All right. And in principle, we can do the same for the string. All right, that wraps up this tutorial. Have fun in your next project.